Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to episode 8 of Opening Basics. Continuing our look at the Sicilian, I'm going to take a look at a couple of sidelines. First, the Grand Prix attack, which is a line that white plays, and then the accelerated dragon, a line that black plays. So the original Grand Prix attack is the immediate f4, right in this position, just after e4 and c5. So an interesting way to play, obviously setting up for a kingside attack. And before I get into the best response, let's just kind of show the idea. Suppose black plays normal Sicilian moves, so get the knights out, get the pieces out, typical Sicilian kind of development. And now bishop to c4, this is part of the idea, and castles. And now the idea you can see is shaping up that white wants to get some pressure along the f-file and also to prepare the move f5 at some point and open up some lines. And because white has just made 2 pawn moves and black has made 3, there's actually quite a lead in development. And of course white has castled already too. The most common way to try and blunt the attack is to play e6 here. And now it's actually even possible to play f5 in this position as a pawn sack. Not quite sound, but can be interesting. But the most common move here is d3 and knight e7. And this is a position that both sides can play. Gets kind of a interesting attack going for white if black is not careful. And but he is going to castle kingside and just try and hold off the attack using his pieces, which are trained on the f5 square. So black is set up to hold off the f5 push, and white will typically try to get this push in, sometimes as a pawn sack or sometimes just pushing immediately. I kind of wonder in this position if it's possible to play a move like g4. What's the engine? Well, the engine doesn't laugh at it, but it gives a slight edge to black there. So maybe it's not good, or the immediate f5. And a lot of times the tension will be left here rather than taking and just bringing a piece forward. Just continuing to bring the pieces forward with the knight here and maybe the queen over. It looks like in this case the pawn push was a bit premature, and white should probably do a few more things to set it up. But that's the general idea, is that white is going to try and get an attack going on the king side like that. You can play that as black, but black players were looking for a more aggressive way to meet the Grand Prix attack, try and maybe even refute it. And they came up with this move d5, which is kind of interesting. So first, let's look at the line where you take. It can turn into a pawn sack. So black, instead of taking right away with the queen, plays the knight out and wants to take the pawn with the knight. And then white gets in this move, bishop b5 check. So that interrupts the protection of this pawn for a moment. But mainly the idea is to buy time to play the move c4, because otherwise this move would be blocking on the light squared bishop. So he's getting his bishop out with tempo and then playing the move c4, holding on to this pawn for a moment. And now black has to go after that pawn. He has to create some tension here. And then white usually gives up the pawn at this point, playing a developing move, bring the knight out, or maybe queen e2. If he can't actually defend the pawn, for example, knight f3 is not sufficient to defend. Black can still take the pawn because he's got both the queen and the knight on it. So if white wants to hold on to the pawn, he has to take here. But this is a gambit for black. He's sacked a pawn, but it turns out to be a good gambit, and he has adequate compensation. White really doesn't want to move the king here. So it gives black another tempo for development. Then if this exchange happens, there's this backwards d-pawn that black will have good play against. Gets easy development for his pieces, nice open file, or semi-open file, I guess, for his rook. And this square is clamped down on, so this d-pawn is going to always be a backwards pawn, and white is behind in development. So so black has adequate compensation here, a decent way to play. So as a result, it's kind of a point counterpoint. So first we start off e4, c5, and the immediate f4 was being played, and then black came up with d5. So white came up with the idea, knight c3, to stop d5. And knight c3 is an interesting move in its own right. So the best way to play against the Grand Prix attack at this point is probably the move knight c6. That's top choice of the engine and the opening database I have here. So, but it's interesting because if your opponent is a sort of player who prefers to play, for example, d6 and a6, going for a knight, or for d6 and g6, going for a dragon, you've tricked him into not playing d6 on the second move here, and now you can transpose back into an open Sicilian by playing the move, knight f3 first, and then later a d4. And so you've gotten your opponent maybe a little bit out of their normal opening preparation. But the line we're looking at here is the Grand Prix attack, so that's the move f4 at this point. And g6 is a normal response, trying to slow down this f5 push, which is still in the position, and just continuing to develop. And we'll get into the position that we actually looked at. If black plays bishop c4, he can also try the move, let's look at this line. So this will transpose into the line we saw previously with the original Grand Prix attack. So he's stopped black from playing d4, and we get into the same kind of setup. And this is okay with the two pawns and the knight on e7 and the bishop looking out at this square. Black has adequate resources to meet the f4 push, but it does lead to interesting play for white, and so sometimes white players will still go for this. The other line that white can try in this position after bishop g7 is they can go bishop b5, trying to get a pin on this knight when that d-pawn moves. But because the d-pawn hasn't moved, black has the response knight to d4, an interesting way to play. And now there's two ways that that white can respond. If white castles, then black should just take the bishop and then kick the knight, and the knight really has nowhere to go. Notice that these two squares are guarded, so the knight just drops back. And this is an okay position, about even. So black is pretty much equalized there. Or the other way to play it is to, after knight d4, take the knight, and then you should take back with a pawn here, gain a tempo on this guy, and this pawn will be kind of a thorn in your opponent's side. And let's see, where does the knight go? The knight goes to e2. And, queen b6 is possible here, or just development with knight f6, or the pawn move d6 is probably playable here. Let's see, is that a move here? Oh, no, it's not a move because it's pinned, right? So you got to chase the bishop away before you can play d6. So knight f6 or queen b6 are your main choices there. And a position that's maybe about even with perhaps a slight edge for black, but interesting way to play nonetheless. So that's about it for the Grand Prix attack. Mainly I wanted to show you a few moves of it and also introduce this d5 idea. So the one other opening I wanted to look at in this video is known as the accelerated dragon. The accelerated dragon is a line that black chooses. So white goes e4, c5, knight f3, intending to play a normal open Sicilian, not trying to hide anything. And black goes with the move knight f6 here, like he's setting up a Sveshnikov or a Kalashnikov with later e5 or knight f6 and e5. So the normal way to play is to go for the open Sicilian d4, pawn takes, and then right here knight f6 would lead to the Sveshnikov. Let's see, e5 here would be the Kalashnikov, and e6 is also a playable move there. We'll get into those Kahn and Paulsen Sicilians in the next video. But The accelerated dragon, the one I wanted to look at, is the move g6. So setting up a dragon formation, but without having moved the d pawn. And the idea is, after, say, knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e3, just kind of the normal moves, black is looking for the opportunity to play the move d4 in one push and maybe gain a tempo on compared to other lines of the dragon. So he wants to play the dragon, but be a tempo up. So knight f6 is a normal move, and what white does to counteract this plan is to play bishop c4. But just to show the idea, if he plays f3, castles, and queen d2, typical kind of Sicilian moves, preparing for queenside castling and delaying the development of the light squared bishop, because sometimes you really prefer to have it on e2, looking at a knight over here. In this point, you could play d5, and this is a good position for black, because this is a standard position in the dragon where black has gained a tempo. So anyway, that's the idea. Let's go back. So the way to play this as white, to avoid that little trick, is to in this position, knight f6. White wants to play bishop c4, and put a clamp on this this idea of pushing d5. And at some point, black will usually give up. He may delay a move, but at some point he will usually give up and just play the move d6 anyway. And now we have transposed into a typical kind of line of the dragon. So might go like this. Castles queenside. Yeah, and that completes the dragon setup. And there's a very typical position you could have gotten into. But of course, it did force the bishop out to this diagonal. So you no longer have to worry about those lines in the dragon where the bishop stays back here. So that's one point of playing the accelerated dragon. And the other point is that if white doesn't play that bishop c4 move, then you have the opportunity to play d5 in one go and gain a tempo on the other lines. So it's an interesting way to play, but there is one wrinkle in it that I should mention. So let's go back to the beginning just to make sure we get this clear in our heads. So it's e4, c5, knight f3, trying to play a normal open Sicilian, knight f6, knight c6, preparing either a Kalashnikov, Sveshnikov, or maybe later transposing into an ordinary Sicilian, we don't know. Kind of a flexible move. And then the exchange of the center, so we've definitely got an open Sicilian now, and now g6, the accelerated dragon, playing g6 before moving the d-pawn. And now at this point, instead of continuing with the normal Sicilian patterns, which are fine for white, white also has the choice of playing c4, the Maraxi bind. And so this is something that the accelerated dragon player needs to be able to play against. And this is an okay accelerated. There's certain Maraxi binds that are, strongly favor one side or the other. This one is sort of a typical middle-of-the-road Maraxi bind, slight edge for white, but not overwhelming. So let's talk a little bit about the Maraxi bind. It's different than the other Sicilians, the way you play this. Say black can play the knight out first or the bishop out first. It doesn't matter. Knight c3 developing, and d6 giving up. Now c4 and e4 have really clamped down on the d5 square, so black has given up on the idea of playing d5 in one go, is just going to play d6. Bishop e2, exchange here. Bishop g7, looking at the queen, but it's not yet a threat, or not much of a threat, because the bishop is unprotected. The knight could go to h5 with a tempo on the queen, but that's not a big threat at this point. So just continuing to develop castles. And now the queen moves back to d2. So kind of a typical Maraxi bind position. In general, the rules are that black wants to exchange pieces. He's a little bit cramped, and the more pieces he can get rid of, the better off he's going to be. White has a little more space, and he's going to just try and maintain the structure and maneuver his pieces. So let's put a few more moves on the board. Rook to c1. He's going to put his pieces on good squares. Queen to a5 and f3. He doesn't want this knight to become overloaded, so he's adding extra protection to the d4 pawn. Rook f to c8, coming out here and putting more pressure on the c pawn. b3 and a6. And now, when is White ever going to castle? I guess White is not in a hurry to castle. I was just looking at the opening book here, but starts going on an adventure with knight a4 and starting to take advantage of his position. I guess the king always has a square f2 if he needs to get out of the way and bring a rook into development. But what's interesting about this position is it's not about the pawn storm. Usually White is just going to try and maneuver with his pieces and get a superior kind of position. There is one tactic to look out for in the Maroczy, which is often this knight to d5 move comes with a tempo, and frequently it's a good square for the knight, so that's something to look out for. If it ever gets exchanged, then a pawn on d5 is a strong piece. And the other thing is that sometimes the queen is on the c file, and this pressure excuse me, I didn't mean to highlight that. There's pressure on the c file, so after the knight goes to d5, it's not always safe to take it and open up the c file. So those are the main features of the Maroczy position. I'm not so good at playing these myself. I've been trying to learn how to play them. So in actual games, I usually go for the other setup. I usually go for a more typical pattern rather than the Maroczy bind pattern. If you're interested in learning more about these Maroczy bind positions, Chess Explained on his channel, he really enjoys playing these positions and plays them quite often, so you can check through his blitz games and find quite a few that were played from a Maroczy bind type of position. So that's it for this video. That covers the Grand Prix and the Accelerated Dragon. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the Taimanov and the Khan Sicilians, and that is actually going to complete my coverage for the Sicilian in this opening basics series, and I will go on to other openings after that. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.